everyone. My name is Morgan Wood, and I'm the host of Community Therapy presented by Hivebrite. And I'm so excited for today's topic. We'll be focusing on helping employees thrive in the community building perspective. So, we have two wonderful guests with us today. We have Phoebe and Rachel, and we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Phoebe to introduce herself, and then Rachel will jump in and introduce herself.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everybody. I'm Phoebe Shin Venkat, and I've been in community in some way or another for the past almost 15 plus years. I also have a background in marketing and communications. With the community work I've been doing, it's been focused around employee community. That's where I got my start, helping people connect peer to peer in companies, and also with customer communities that are external facing where customers are learning from each other, from the organizations that they're buying products and services from. But I also am very involved in communities in my local community. I'm a planning commissioner in my city of Foster City. I'm part of a board of a nonprofit that serves victims of domestic violence. I'm also part of several political organizations. I'm actually running for office myself this year. So really glad to be here with Rachel, Morgan, and Kat.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Phoebe. Rachel, would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. Thank you for having me, Morgan. And I'm excited just to chat with Phoebe because we haven't had that opportunity very often over the last 15 years. I guess it's been busy, which is great. My background is a little more circuitous in that I started off studying politics. But then I ended up as an analyst, and I worked in the academic setting. I worked in the Pentagon, and then I worked at a management consulting firm for years looking at supply chain and new product development operations at global companies. And then I got into technology, and I was a product manager and a product marketer. So that's kind of my background. And then I was IDC's first social software analyst. So I was doing market analysis as well. And I got really interested in online communities because I saw what the internet was doing, and then I saw what social media was doing. And I was like, the information environment changes everything about the way we organize. And that kind of led to starting the Community Roundtable in 2009 and the annual research I did, because what I was trying to figure out is companies are far too rigid and slow for the information environment. And it's only going to speed up. And the more it speeds up outside, the more friction exists inside. And so how are these communities operating in a way that is actually productive from a business value perspective? Like, what are they doing? How are they structuring themselves to not have employees and still generate this value? And when we look at the WordPress ecosystem now, it owns like 43% of website, like it's the fundamental platform for 43% of worldwide websites. Yeah. And there's no, they used to call this in organizations, there's no throat to choke. Like if you're competing, who do you compete with? You compete with thousands of little organizations in this big ecosystem of communities. And so that's kind of what I foresaw happening. And so I wanted to understand community. So I'm best known for that annual research called The State of Community Management. And then I got bored because I learned what I wanted to learn from that. I learned how to calculate an ROI. I could project community growth based on a first year of growth. And I really wanted to get into the nitty gritty and work more deeply with organizations to figure out what are the bumps in the road when you actually try and do that in a holistic way. So since then, I started engaged organizations, and I've worked with a couple of clients, and that has been wildly fascinating. But I've worked with a lot of very large global organizations and big global nonprofits. So I've got a lot of experience, for lack of a better word, working in a lot of different kinds of organizations.
Oh, Beautiful. And I'm so glad to have both of you here today because I think both of your backgrounds speak so much to what we're focusing on, which is helping employees thrive using community. So, Rachel, kind of jumping off of your introduction with your background, and then Phoebe, would love for you to then jump in too. Our first question that we have jotted down here is, how are communities used within organizations? So, in your experience, Rachel, I know that you touched on this already, sort of lightly, but when we're talking about helping employees thrive, what what are we talking about when it comes to communities and organizations?
So I think the general perception and the reality is a little different because a lot of people, when they think of online communities, they're like, oh, pets and dogs, and they think Facebook, right?
Yeah,
Which is not actually particularly helpful for employees. Although that's part of it, meaning people naturally connect around those things that they love. So that's a part of it, but it's a small part in organizations. And I think some organizations make the mistake of saying, oh, this is like Facebook.
yeah,
And so they have like communities of interest. I'm like, but really what we do at work 95% of the time is we work.
yeah,
Like we're not there. I like all of those things are nice, but if you're also not looking at work, actual work and the way we work, you're not really getting the most out of a community. So that, and I'll go back to the research. Our research showed that collaboration was the biggest use case by far. Second, community of practice, which gets into the learning, knowledge management, expertise area.
yeah,
The third was networking, which might be the puppies and the sports and the interest groups, all
yeah,
good. Um, uh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. And then the fourth was corporate initiatives. So that's the like the internal comms, like we want everybody to know what's going on.
yeah.
And then fifth, we had community of interest, which can overlap with networking. So people might have answered both of those the same way. So those are generally the way things work. The
Yeah,
specifics of each are quite different. We can get to that, but that's
absolutely.
generally how they're used.
And then Phoebe, I think from your background too, you were in your introduction, you were talking about the expertise of the company communities that you have seen as well. Is there anything you want to add to just how communities are typically used within organizations?
Community within organizations, they already exist, right? There's already employees hanging out, talking about things that bring them together, whether they're things like the puppy dogs and other things, affinities that they have, commonalities with, or they're talking about, for example, at the company I was first building employee community at, the people who were the parts managers across this huge 150,000 person company, they were actually very frustrated because they could not connect with each other. They were in silos. Every P&L center, profit and loss center, had different parts managers that couldn't find each other in a directory. So they weren't itching to have like a community where they can hang out and talk, although that is what ended up happening. So when we launched our online community that gave them a platform to actually collaborate with each other, they could get their work done faster. So there was time to build those bonds and relationships of finding out, what do you do after work? What are things that you're passionate about? Having a joke here or there. And they were able to do that through the online community. But online obviously isn't the only answer, right? That was the official tool that the community offered, of which I was the community manager. But we know that people love meeting offline, when it's natural, when it makes sense, not when it's sanctioned fun, because that sanctioned fun usually is not fun.
Absolutely.
And
That's
I'll actually just add to that because when
yeah,
I spent a couple of years working with Microsoft Hardware, which is 40,000 people globally in 5 product groups.
yeah,
And Phoebe will know this because of that use case. If you have to go out and create a new channel partner for a component, whatever, a new supply chain partner, that is very hard to do because it needs to be validated. You need quality control, you need like evaluation, all of this stuff. For new product teams building something, if they can talk to a community of practice and have somebody in another country in another product group say, hey, we already use a supplier for that part and they're very reliable and we've had great success with them, that removes weeks, months of work for a product team. So if you talk about ROI on its own, that covers like that community of practice for probably 5 years, right? Like that's an expensive thing that if you don't have to do is a huge operational cost savings, and it reduces complexity because now you're not managing 4, 5, 10 suppliers for the same type of part.
Oh, wow. Both of those are examples really, I think, bring to the surface like the impact that these communities can have. So kind of for the listeners, it sounds like the primary thing is like you're removing these silos and you're starting to create a space where people are starting to help advance each other's work. And so you're starting to build this engine that feels more intrinsic and feels more collaborative. But I'm wondering, how do you set expectations or maybe bumpers for employees to understand their role in these communities and so they can have a positive experience and feel successful? And I think both of those examples you gave at a high level makes a lot of sense, but then how does this look operationally? And I would love, Phoebe, for you to kick it off if
Sure.
you
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. Yeah, there's many different ways you can do this. At the company that I started community, I can just say the company, it's Tyco. We felt like we had to do it several methods, not one way wasn't going to work for everybody. So we did have the more official ways, which is writing actual guidelines. But instead of publishing very stuffy guidelines, we wrote something called the Credo, right? And we wrote it like it's actually my voice, but tried to just capture a voice that was a little bit more um, not so stuffy, not so serious, and more like, hey, we all want this to work, right? This is great. This is an investment that our leadership team invested in this online community so that we can build together, we can get to know each other, like we can have fun as well as, doing our work, which is the main point. So we had the Credo set, but more importantly, we had what we called ambassadors or Yambassadors because we were using Yammer at the time. Yambassadors seated throughout the business units, right? So we had people who were like parts managers, like I mentioned before, people who are business executives, people who are in sales, right? Installers from all different personas we tried to capture across the company who are the ones modeling behavior, right? Because Phoebe from corporate saying, don't curse, don't do this, don't do that is very boring to hear and also frustrating because I don't know what everyone's going through. I don't know what kind of days people are having. So it resonates a lot more when they see someone that does the job they do or someone they already respect and trust modeling certain behaviors in the community. And of course, there's always going to be people that don't model those behaviors, right? We did have a few incidents where, I think there was one where two two people thought that they were in a private chat, but they were in the company, oops, the all company feed. They didn't curse or anything, but they were talking about some very interesting subjects. And again, it was just like, okay, so what are we going to do? So we looked to the Credo, we looked to the guidelines, and also we made sure that we looped in our legal partners ahead of time, right? Because they had no idea they never worked with launching any kind of social network, much less an employee one. They were actually very scared and thought, oh, do we need to delete all the feeds every 30 days? We were like, no, the feeds are the jewels. If we
Yeah.
delete those, there's no point to even launch this. We'll just go back to the SharePoint site, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, no shade to SharePoint.
No shade, no
Or
shade.
all shade, I don't know. My boss, my old boss had said SharePoint is where documents go to die. So I always thought that quote was,
I mean,
was cute. But yeah, like involving legal upfront, not because you're trying to ding any employees. I mean, I'm an employee, right? I want to make sure my colleagues were treated with respect, but also treated with accountability like adults that they are.
I love that. And Rachel, I mean, same question for you. When we're talking about, building these spaces for employees, how do you see expectations and kind of those bumpers forming their experience?
So setting up a new one of these is the hardest thing. Like that that early phase is really hard. And I echo Phoebe, you need guidelines. One of the things that I think is really important in guidelines, and I've had a lot of clients use it with success, is I really push clients towards being very clear about what they want people to be doing explicitly.
Yeah.
First, say, this is a place to do X, Y, and Z. So you're giving people the ideas of like, this is what this is for.
Right.
And then only secondarily, be like, and employees are already under contract. So you don't need to get too legalese about what you can't do, but you're like, be nice, don't name names, don't, like there's a way to discuss things without like, don't attack people, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of basic. The second is this modeling. And it's interesting because I end up being very intentional about seeding and creating that initial set of interactions. And I work with pilot communities, so a small number, and really get them going, because most people in organizations know they can be fired. So they're really like, you don't have the problem of the open web where everybody's like, I can attack anybody I want because like nobody, the police aren't here, right? Like, but inside organizations, for the most part, in most organizations, people don't want to do the wrong thing. And so you have to show them what success looks like.
Right.
And I had a very forward-looking client led by the chief learning officer who actually got compensation for emerging leaders in this professional services firm to spend, I forget how many hours a week it was, on communities, but they were the community leaders. And they were people who we called nexperts, the next experts, right? Like they weren't the subject matter experts yet. They were still developing their expertise. There weren't leadership roles for them formally yet, but this was a leadership development opportunity for them. They got, because it was professional services, they got reimbursed for that time, which is a problem in professional services organizations. And then my role there was training them and what does it mean to like manage one of these things. And when I do strategy for any community, I force my clients to pick 3 behaviors that will accelerate or meet the business objective of the community. Because the biggest challenge with communities is you can get distracted by all the things, all the conversations, all the things, oh, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea. None of that emergence is bad, but you can't, as a enterprise community manager where you're managing the ecosystem, it's impossible to focus on all the things. So I'm like, get the things that matter most, focus on them, make sure they happen. Everything else will come along or not, or whatever. But those are the things that will keep your program funded because they're furthering the objective of whoever gave you the budget for this. So that's kind of mine. And then lastly, I've created executive dashboards for executive stakeholders because they make the mistake of either they don't come in at all because they're like, this is a hot mess. I have no idea what's going on here. Or they come in and they shut down engagement too easily. They come in and answer something and nobody else is going to answer when that person has come in and said something. So we went through and coached them to validate and respond and just say, that's a great question. That's a great answer. Like nothing else. But that validation is really powerful, even though, and you can send executives 5 links and say, just like these 5 things or like whatever. That's their best value add to the engagement of everybody else. So those are like broadly my tips.
Oh, Beautiful broad tips. And one follow-up question, just because I think folks who are listening might have the same, is when you're working with your clients and they are identifying the three main focuses, is there a commonality that they kind of come to, or is it different per community? Because I could see it being different per,
Um,
but interested to hear.
it's different based on the use case, like what are you trying to get out of this? And the key behaviors are not the three behaviors that will get you to your goal necessarily if they're not represented in the community already. Like you can't accelerate something that doesn't exist. So you have to kind of compromise with where is the state of engagement now and where do you want it to be, and kind of move it down the pipeline a little bit rather than overshoot and get no engagement. So it has to be comfortable enough for people that you can get them there.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you so much for explaining that. Phoebe, when I'm taking all of this in, I think the next question that comes to my mind is, how do communities elevate everyone's strengths to help bolster the weaknesses? So as we're talking about, Rachel, like you were just mentioning, how you're getting folks to come in and see it. And Phoebe, I know you were talking about how you built out that program similarly. So I'm wondering from where you sit, where do you think communities are coming in to elevate strengths and then also to support weaknesses?
Yeah, I think strengths is so important, understanding what your strengths are. Some people may understand what their strengths are, except they're not able to use some or all of those strengths during their day to day. And I think having some kind of community, an online community, can help people be able to use their strengths, right? So if you're really good at communicating, right, connecting with people, but maybe your job is very isolating, you can go to the online community and be able to use your connection skills there. We actually saw a lot of that at Tyco, where people were in roles where perhaps they were installer out in the field, you know, 8 to 12 hours a day. They felt isolated. They were proud of their jobs. They like to serve the clients and they did a good job, but they felt like they weren't part of something bigger. And that was actually something that we saw in employee engagement surveys. And that was a big reason why I took the role, right? Because it wasn't a typical, let's tell employees what to do, launch the tool, and the tool will take care of itself. I like that. I love that Tyco was basing, why they were launching this online community on actual data, right?
Yeah.
The data that showed that people felt like they couldn't collaborate. Like I said before, the silos were so opaque that they couldn't even find each other's numbers, even if they did the same job, just in different business units. People also felt like they weren't getting the full story on company goals, visions, challenges. A lot of the times they didn't trust middle management. Maybe that was earned. Sometimes it wasn't earned, just because middle managers are kind of crushed in the middle, doing so much. And then lastly, people also felt like they weren't contributing to a broader vision. They really didn't understand what that broader vision was. So we felt like we could overlay that onto our goals in the community. So it's not just, let's just get more likes and more people posting, because you could have all that. And that's good, to have activity in there. But is it activity that's driving those three areas and more, but focusing on those three areas? So back to the people who are feeling like maybe disconnected or not able to collaborate, the tool was kind of a shortcut for them to be able to dive in. And I was in the communications team, so our job is really writing those articles, about the company. Like, isn't our company great? And those articles didn't really land super well with people, as you could imagine. So instead of writing those articles all ourselves as the comms team, we democratized it, right? So we would grab conversations or posts and insights from the community and link them to our weekly newsletter. So someone who had no idea they were good at communications or writing or anything, we would link and feature their post or their interaction. And that really got people excited as well. Like, oh, I'm featured in the newsletter. I'm not important. I'm not fancy, but it's like, well, you wrote something that really resonated and you helped a lot of people that way.
Oh, wow. I love that so much. And also, Phoebe, at the top, you shared that a lot of this was based on data. Was this something when you're coming into the role, it was already existing, or did you have to build out that survey?
Good question. Yeah, it was already existing, right? And
Oh,
that's when they realized, "Oh, we need someone that not only is a communications professional, but also knows how to build a community around getting people together and aligned and feeling like they trust each other and the organization they're in." So I think that sometimes when you know that a role is meant for you, like I actually was looking for a blend of something because I was contracting at another company, and I actually introduced an employee social network tool to my manager there, and he was like, "That looks dumb." And I was like, I think I need to, and he's not dumb, he's a very smart person,
yeah.
but didn't see the value. He's like, well, we write the
Absolutely.
stuff and we put it online and they read it. I'm like, they don't read it. It's, it is a bunch of corporate writing. I know I was doing the writing, right? And I'm like, I'm not writing things that are exciting. They're technically right, but
Yeah.
are they something someone wants to read in the middle of a busy day when they're dealing with all the stressors? Like they don't want
Yeah.
to read like, "Yay, everything's perfect and amazing, and you should be happy, and make sure to put on the next survey that you are happy." So we got the raw when we got the raw data when I first joined the company. I got to go through all the data. I was like, "Wow, this is actually a treasure trove." Right,
Yeah.
because I can connect my work, and I think that's something that it's a little on a tangent, but sometimes some community builders struggle with, well, how do I make my work resonate with leadership? But you need to make sure you have the right data, qualitative and quantitative, to go together, right? And if you don't have the quantitative data yet, you don't need to have a fancy survey, but you can actually do your own quick surveys, right? And if I didn't have that with me and I had that job, then I would have to go and seek some kind of data that would help show, not to prove my value or the value of the network, but why are we doing this? Because it's the right thing to do for the company and the employees.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that perspective because when you mentioned initially that, you came in with that data, I was like, "Oh, that's so awesome that it was already existing." But also thank you for sharing the perspective of
Yeah,
just like how to also build that. And Rachel, I know
sure.
we kind of moved a little along the question, but I want to just circle back to you and see, anything stand out for you for how communities can be used to elevate strengths and,
Well,
comp.
Phoebe kind of said this, but
Yeah.
not quite as directly, which is what I've observed is people don't kind of understand their strengths a lot of the time. I was
Mm,
in this bucket.
yeah.
I had no idea. I had no idea the things that I found easy were things other people couldn't do. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and really couldn't do. Like I saw things other people were like, that's brilliant. And I'm like, whatever. It took 2 seconds. Like, whatever. I see it. Like I just so what happens, and this happened when I had a blog, my first blog a long time ago. But what happens is somebody will post something and they will get validated for it and complimented for it. And and it helps them learn about themselves.
Mm,
So they know what their strengths are because you need other people to reflect that back to you. Because
yeah.
don't you don't know what relatively you don't know what your strengths are.
Right.
And communities help in this regard and many other ways because they're incremental. They're
Mm,
not one big report. Like you don't go get assessed by a psychologist and been like, you can do these things or like
yeah.
whatever. You're getting that constant validation back. And one of my clients, I loved what they did. I have an engagement framework that I use to kind of help people understand where the community is. And he used that for a dashboard. But then we did a presentation together and he pulled an example of each one of those major behavior categories
Yeah.
and said, this in this office, this person exemplifies this. And so one of them I remember because it was a junior person in a national like organization with many offices who just liked everything. She didn't comment, she didn't create content. she didn't feel confident, but everyone knew her after a year or two. So she had made connections because her superpower was validating other people. And that is a strength that I'm not sure, like coming in at 22, you would have necessarily articulated for herself. So that, and when you're in person, it's easy to dismiss, but when you see it in black and white online, it is more impactful, and you can like it, you go back to it again and again. So I think that is huge for that. And again, ROI for people is finding those things that they think are super easy, but other people don't know yet. And it's why I call communities the massive multiplayer matching engine, right? Because the best person to answer my question is not necessarily the subject matter expert, right? I run into this. I've worked in communities for so long. People will ask me a question. I'll get very theoretical and they're looking at me like, I don't understand what I just was asking. Like, I don't even remember when I learned whatever it is they're looking for. The best person to answer that question is the person who just learned it, because they still understand when they learned it, why it made an impact, where the aha moment was. And it's easy for them to answer because they just learned it. For me, I have to like, okay, like go back 15 years. I can't, like, at a certain point you have too much in your brain. You're like, I can't even, like, I can't even get there. So, you know, in the old world of linear transactions and emails, companies had to designate subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Those subject matter experts are overwhelmed, and they have a day job other than just sitting there being a subject matter expert, right? And one of the hacks that I give to clients all the time when they're starting communities is go to your subject matter experts, tell them all to find 5 emails where they answered a question and just post it in the community. So they never, ever have to answer that question ever again. And if there's new information, it can get incorporated into the stream. And there's a single source of like truth on it. Super easy hack. But
it's such an easy hack too, especially when you think about Slack or Teams or whatever you're using to communicate, the number of questions or channels those questions are being asked in. Oh, that's such a great hack.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's my ROI for everyone.
Magic. And you know, Rachel, kind of building off of that, when we're building communities in this space, how do you recommend that people design, or community builders design and implement skill development programs that actually cater to different learning styles? So that hack, I think, is a really great jumping off point of kind of lowering that bar to entry. But I'm just wondering, you know, from your point of view, when designing these programs, where do you recommend people start? Because I think it can be overwhelming for folks when they're trying to build this space.
Yeah, so the idea is there's a spectrum of complexity and there's a spectrum of effort, right? And especially when you're starting out, you don't want to jump. Like I think about like optimal balancing engagement and value. There's a Venn diagram and there's a sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah.
And people tend to be tempted to either, like, you tell an executive, like, I want you to post something, and they'll be like, what do you think of our annual strategy? I don't know. You spent 18 months on it. I'm not going to comment. Like, it's done. Like, I'm not going to tell you it sucked. Like,
very loaded question to post.
Yeah, and it's huge. Like, what part of the strategy? It looks pretty. Like, like, what do I say to that, right? On the other end, one of the most engaging posts I ever had on Facebook was, what's your favorite apple? It was the fall, it's New England. Yeah. People were like duking it out. And I'm like, whoa, right? No, and people were duking it out because it had no value. Like it doesn't matter. So like it was a lot of fun, but if you're thinking in an organizational context, okay, well, I might do that because it's fun, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really have any direct business value. Getting feedback on strategy would have a lot of value, but nobody's going to answer it. So like, what's the thing in the middle? So that's one. And then we do something about creating what I think I call engagement routines and putting them into what I call a topic cycle. So if you've got one community in an organization out of many communities, you have lots of little things that you can do to ask a question, like, is it a wacky Wednesday, a flop Friday, a three frogs? What do you got going on this week? Post. Those are what I think of as routines. They can be as simple as a question.
Yeah.
And then I advise each community to have a routine cadence that is the same every month, but with a different topic every month.
Yeah.
Right. So each month you're going to discuss, I don't know, pens.
Right.
Right. And you start the month off with an intro, and then you do a couple of these very light engagement things. And then you might have an online conversation or an in-person conversation or whatever. You might have some experts come in and post an opinion. Like, so you're giving people like that scale of, you can come in and just do something easy. You can come in and really dig in. And then we're going to wrap it up at the end of the, and so you're getting a cadence that everybody's comfortable with, meaning I know what's happening every month, like kind of expectation wise. But it's changing topic wise. And so that really allows you to build expertise too, because you're not flitting from one topic to the next constantly. Exactly. And things come up, again, emergent stuff, people have questions that they escalate, but as a thinking about it as a knowledge management, like I want to advance the discipline, and where's the edge, and what are the topics that are emerging or relevant to people right now. So like, that's a long-winded way of saying it, but find a lot of different ways for people to connect, and also realize a lot of people like to lurk. Like, and lurking is learning, right? Like if they're reading, if they're on there and they're reading, you don't want everybody asking the same question. Like, that's not actually a very effective community, right? So being okay with that, and not like not trying to force everybody into the same dynamic.
And I really like that point, because, you know, when we're thinking about the different types of learning styles that are coming together, the preference for communication, I think that's such a great way to kind of structure that expectation. I can imagine that's probably more effective to explain to a stakeholder why you're using that type of cadence. Because I think oftentimes we do hear, well, people should be commenting more, they should be sharing more. And I think that really creates that boundary to allow people to come to the information they feel most comfortable with. But on that same,
lower expectations, and
that
initially lower expectations. Like, you're not going to solve world peace.
No.
Like,
exactly.
It's a compounding generative, like it takes time to develop that trust in that space, and there's no way around that.
Absolutely. And like, Phoebe, off of that thought, anything else you would want to add when we're talking about, you know, catering to diverse learning styles and preferences, in addition to that framework Rachel shared?
Yeah, you're helping people understand like there's different ways to contribute, there's different ways to get involved. It does engagement, I think sometimes that word can be so loaded because it sounds like it's supposed to be comments and people starting new posts, but we do know that's just not everyone's bag, you know. I know that one example of something that was really useful that people could just do on their own time for maybe minutes a month if they wanted to was we started a acronym dictionary, because you can imagine a company of like all these hundreds, thousands of people that what does this mean? Because ABS in one business unit might mean something, and maybe it's different in another business unit. So at the time, we had this mechanism to have docs within the social network. So I spun one up, but I didn't do the work. I might have seeded it with a couple things, but that I would mention and say, hey, Jennifer, didn't you just define this for this person? Do you mind adding it to here and any other ones you might think of? And then people were adding to it just on their own time. I'd go back and like check, after being going home, coming back and seeing like people added to it in all the different time zones as well, because it was something easy to do. And they felt like, wow, I'm actually contributing. And maybe, there's going to be less of those kinds of questions because honestly, it wasn't part of anybody's orientation program, right?
Yeah.
And these are things that may come up, 2 years into your job, you finally hear of some kind of acronym. It shouldn't be something just thrown at you at orientation anyway. You won't even remember.
Exactly.
Shout out to Heather Osmus, who is a longtime community manager. She created a meme called I Love Acronyms. So it looked like I Love New York. And she did it like
Oh,
every week or every month. It was
Oh, I love that.
external community, but I thought that was awesome.
Oh my
that's
gosh,
so
I love
cool.
that so much. And Phoebe, that it also is such a great way to kind of measure, I think, that example of like how much people are engaging and what a great example to be able to show up. Like, yeah, actually, we've as a community compiled this dictionary of, probably hundreds of acronyms over time.
Yeah.
It's so
And
impactful.
making sure that you celebrate those folks too, right? The
Yeah.
curators, the ones that organize just as much, or if not more, than those you celebrate those that maybe comment a lot. I mean, that's great
Yeah.
too, right? But we
Exactly.
want to make sure it's not just, oh, this is the popular party, right?
Yeah.
Where if you have a lot of followers or you comment a lot, then you're great. And then here's some other things you can do. It's like, no, these things are all valuable, right?
Yeah.
Because that acronym list
And
was
I
accessed.
want
I think I had like a bit.ly link where I was tracking and people were just accessing it all the time. So that was definitely value.
Yeah.
I want to add something to this, just a note of caution to people running these programs in organizations is to fight for integration with professional reviews, their engagement in facilitating communities, because so often it feels to me like we have ambassador programs or whatever, and it's just expected on top of whatever else you're doing. And guess who usually gets taken advantage of, right? Like they're putting in a lot of work, but not getting recognized for it. So if you're thinking about programs or people facilitating these engagement activities, you don't have to do it immediately, but have on your roadmap to have conversations with HR about integrating
Yeah.
professional development points or reviews or however you construct that, or actual payment, which is what my one client did, because it's not, we shouldn't be adding that to people's jobs.
And that's such a great, I think, jumping off point for our next question, Rachel, which is how do you get the most value? How can you help employees or members of these communities get the most value out of these communities that contributes to their personal success so that it feels intrinsic and it feels like a space they want to come back to? So I would love if you, have an example that you want to share about that specifically, because I think that finding a way to put that on the roadmap is a really great way to kind of anchor that that contribution to success. So any high level thoughts? I know we could probably talk about it for an hour or two.
So one thing that I love that we did at the CR, the community roundtable, because we had our own community of practice, is we did what we called a work out loud thread, but it could be your Monday check-in, it could be three frogs, it could be whatever you want to call it. But
Yeah.
basically we asked people to just list 3 things they were working on. Not how well it was going, not like like this is not a project check-in, just what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it was a way to just say good morning, how helping people be a little more intentional about what they're focused on in the week. But we did not want paragraphs. And some people got to paragraphs, and I used to get a little annoyed by that because I was like, this is not like, we don't need to read your project update.
Yeah.
But what would happen is to do it well, it would take a minute or 2.
Yeah.
And this, when we started it happened for a while. And then what happened is people would start replying to each other and been like, oh my God, that's been on my plate for 6 months. I have no idea how to do that. Or like, I haven't had time to think about it. And the first person would be like, let's get on a phone call. I'm happy to walk you through what I did, and you can have my template, you can have my PowerPoint, and you know, right? Like, and so now they just saved like weeks, months of time for a couple of minutes every week of participating in that. So like that's a high ROI activity. And Phoebe just gave a brilliant example too, is like you're incrementally asking people to have a little fun thinking about what an acronym stands for or making crap up. But in the end, getting the right answers and creating something together, like it's modularizing or amortizing, or what's the word, atomizing a lot of work into small manageable chunks, and we do it together, and like we get this huge result. I think that's the way to, especially early on when people aren't really sure what's the point of these communities, the faster you can kind of get to that value. One other example that I will point out, that's from a client who built it was a B2B construction equipment company.
Oh, cool.
And so all their account managers were around the world on construction sites. Right. Onboarding was horrible for those people, right? Can you imagine, you're coming in, you're abroad, like you've got really complicated equipment.
Yep.
When your client site has an issue with equipment and it shuts down, that's tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Right. Like it accrues, like the cost to them accrues very quickly. You get really stressed.
Yeah.
If I'm new, I don't know who to ask. Like,
right.
Like it's this phone tree of like, do you know somebody? Do you know somebody? Do you know somebody? If you can ask in a community and get a response back within like 15 minutes that solves that problem, that one problem solution has paid for itself.
Yeah.
Like has paid for the entire platform, right? It's right. Like it's hard for executives to see, because that's an opportunity value that they missed. It's opportunity cost they missed. So they got an opportunity value and they never saw the cost. So they don't understand what they just got. So it's our job to help. I have a slide called the self-evident value of community, and I literally walk people through how this happens. And for executives, it's all about shortening workflow, and they're like, oh yeah, clearly. And you're like, yes. It's not about, I mean, it is about connection. You only get engagement if you have, like, it's a complex sequence, but at the end of the day, you're shortening work, you're making it faster, you're making it more effective, you're making it more successful, like whatever it is, you're increasing quality, like you're doing something significant for the business.
Oh, Rachel, those examples were so impactful. And Phoebe, I just want to see, like, in your experience too, is even within, I'm thinking about the experience that making a hard pivot, but your experience with local government too, in that community sense of when you're on these boards or you're in local government or any of your community background, when we're talking about building on success and actually making sure others feel a part of that, that immediately jumped to my mind when Rachel was giving that example with the construction company. So I'm wondering if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I think like for the most part, it's similar to the Parks and Rec show, right? I don't know. I think you're both familiar with that. I'm actually rewatching it now as
Me
maybe
too.
homework. It's a great show. But and it's obviously really funny, but there's like grains of truth in there, right? A lot of grains of truth where, again, people who are elected are appointed officials. They're like looking at these big hairy problems. They're like, oh, I want to do this. I want to have this vision for the city. And that's great. You're supposed to have that mindset. But at the end of the day, when I'm talking to people, it's like, well, there's potholes here, and and that pedestrian walk doesn't seem as safe as it used to be, and that that corner is experiencing more traffic because of XYZ. I think
Yeah.
that people contributing their opinions and feedback, that's how they're contributing, right? It's not going to be glamorous. It's if anyone sends in an email or goes to a city council meeting, that's less so, right? I think it's what are people able to do with the time that they have. But I
Yeah.
know being on the planning commission, uh, and we look at larger projects that are coming towards the city, people will come to me and say, oh, my permit's taking too long to approve on something small, right? Because that's what matters to them. They may
Yeah.
not care as much that a pharma company is converting, office space to lab/office space, right? That's not really their concern. They need to know
You've
why
seen
it's
them.
taking,
You have
6
pothole
months.
apps, right? Boston has a pothole
Yeah,
app, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
and be like, there's a pothole, like right here.
Yeah.
yeah. We have an app called See Click Fix. It's not our app, but it's an app that we can use. But again, like for some people, they don't want to go to an app, right? They want to talk to somebody. They
Yeah.
want to know that like we were mentioning before, that their feelings and what they're seeing is validated, right? Because a lot of the times, I honestly can't solve the problem for them. Being a planning commissioner comes with zero power, right? I'm really a citizen. I'm part of an advisory committee. I do the best that I can to review projects, provide input based on data, but I can't like fast track anything for anybody, nor should I be, doing that because that would be favoring people.
Yeah.
But if someone gets to complain to me for 15 minutes, for them that feels like something got done, right? And I can still connect them with people. I can maybe remind somebody on staff, but it's still going to proceed at the pace it's going to proceed. It's just someone felt listened to along the way. It's not that different than when I've managed communities for product driven communities for companies like Salesforce, right? There's going to be certain apps or certain features that people are not as happy with, and
Right.
sometimes you, as the community person, that that's probably not going to change, but
Yeah.
you at least can listen, get the feedback, and tell and be honest about that, right? Definitely don't make promises that you can change anything. Say, I'm going
Absolutely.
to package this up, get the insights, share with the product team. And sometimes it will surprise you. Like when I was working at Facebook, I was like, wow, this is a big machine. There's no way the product team of this particular feature is going to listen. But someone on my team named Kate, who's awesome, she just kept hitting it because we were getting so much feedback in the community. So she
Yeah.
kept putting together like the insight reports. And then the
Mhm.
product team was like, yeah, we should revert that feature. We were like, oh yeah, of course you will. And inside we were like, oh my gosh, we actually got a win. So, sometimes it's like you can just keep plugging away. You're not always going to get the W, but I think part of the W that you get is that people do feel respected and listened to, even if it's not always going to turn out their way.
Oh, Phoebe, that was
That is
you had so many
so
golden
amazing.
nuggets throughout that. I want to say last night I restarted watching Parks and Rec, and in the pilot episode, Leslie Knope
Yeah.
talks about how when people are coming and complaining, it's just them caring loudly at her. And I think that's so
Yes,
much
yes.
what you were
That's so
sharing is
funny. I started it
like,
on Monday.
oh
I was
my
like,
gosh.
let me just fire
We're
this
in
up because it just landed, I think, on Hulu or something, or one of
So
yeah.
the Peacock
I will
Hulu.
add, I,
What was
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Michelle Wu in Boston. She's our mayor.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Woo
She
Train.
is,
Yeah.
she is amazing, but she gets
Phenomenal.
on, well, she comes on WBUR, the NPR station, every
Yeah.
Monday
Oh
for
my
like
God.
live Q&A. And
I love
she
that.
pivots from one big,
Wow.
like from police to potholes to whatever. And listening to her is amazing
Yeah.
because and this is where it comes down to the details.
Yep.
People are really scared to ask people for their opinions
Yeah.
because they think they need to
Mm-hmm.
solve the problem when
Yeah.
people really just want to be seen and heard, right?
Exactly.
And so she does that in linguistically a really sophisticated way that both validates them and doesn't talk down to them and explains like all the things she's balancing. And she's just amazing to listen to.
Wow.
She's doing these impromptu, which most politicians will not get on the phone with somebody live and just jump from one topic to the, I'm sure she has some prep, like I'm sure they
Yeah.
agree on topics, but just amazing.
That's
So I
incredible.
see
Link
her as a
that.
very community management oriented mayor.
Yeah. And we'll
That
link
is
that
amazing.
too. And, we'll link Parks and Rec and all of those things. But oh my
Yeah,
gosh. So, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you both for hours on end, but we're coming to our last question, and our last question, always the kicker, I feel, with community therapy, which is how do we measure impact? And I know you both touched on it all throughout, but if you had to give advice to someone who's listening to this podcast and maybe is just feeling really overwhelmed with, okay, now I'm understanding the depths of how I can help my members and I'm understanding these frameworks, but where do I start with measuring ROI and impact? What would be that starting point that you would recommend? And Phoebe, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
sure. As I mentioned before, like those broader, I guess, buckets, like excelling accelerating collaboration, right? Getting people the news that they actually can use that will help them with their roles and feel connected to one another. And then people wanting to feel contributing that they're contributing to the overall vision and goals of the company. Those are like the umbrellas. And then within those is where you would have certain goals. Sometimes the goals are not seeded from the beginning because you don't know how things are going to play out. Like, for example, with the parts managers being able to save time and not having to single-handedly call each individual person after you scramble to find the number, and that taking like weeks to get each other's parts information. That is time saved, right? Like Rachel mentioned before, the opportunity, value, and cost saved. So those are the kind of things that you want to be able to track, right, as a community builder, along with the things that tracking engagement is important still, right? You do want to see that the ebb and flow of comments and likes and all those things are there, but definitely be careful about what's the narrative behind it, right? If you just present a report to leadership or as a cross-functional stakeholder, these are this is, they might just focus on comments and say, oh, looks like it dropped last week, what happened? And then they start spinning, right, and thinking, oh, it's not successful, this is not good, why are we spending money on this? You need to be able to craft those kinds of narratives of the data that's in front of them. Otherwise, people will craft their own narratives, and sometimes they're not going to be the right ones. I think another thing you can do to show the impact is I actually made sure I operated like a marketer using my marketing skills and, you know, showcased use cases featuring the employees. So featuring the parts manager who started that parts manager group and added everybody who he did it without anyone telling him to, definitely not corporate. He called me and said, do you want to talk to me about the group I started? Because this is super cool, right? So I'm like, well, this shouldn't stay between me and him. This should be a part of a campaign. So we launched a campaign, internal comms campaign, where we featured people like Rob from the parts manager group, like someone else who did this, someone else who did that. And they were all different kinds of people so that people could again see, okay, these are the behaviors that seem to be working, and it doesn't mean you have to copy Rob because that may not be something that you're facing in your day-to-day job, but it gets people thinking and you're seeding kind of like that behavior. But again, like you have to be able to quantify this. You have to be able to, quickly relay this to someone. Like if we're always saying the elevator, although now I'm not in elevators with executives that much anymore, but you have to be able to quickly say within 10 minutes, what is the value? 10 minutes or less, what's the value, and not have to go through a million slides. It's this we're contributing to, we're seeing gains in productivity, time saved, and trust in, the direction the company's going. And then, I was lucky in that the company that I worked at, Tyco, was able to do another, annual survey and they saw gains in those particular areas. I wouldn't say outrageous gains, nothing like 30%, but enough to be able to show that, because of implementing this social network, we were able to help move the needle on this. The social network can't take all the credit because I think part of it is telling employees your leadership cares about you being able to do the best jobs, right?
Yeah.
This is why they got this for us, for the company, being honest about that. Not just we got a network because we think it's fun and we want you to connect. Like that's a great byproduct, but being honest with people about why investments were made, just like if you make any kind of investment in capital, right? And I think people, for the most part, at least the ones I talked to, were like, it feels good to know that leadership understood that we need stuff,
Yeah.
so I think that also helped move the needle to not just the network itself, but the fact that some kind of thought was given and an investment was made after data was seen that it wasn't working.
Yeah. And I really love Phoebe, well, everything you said, but also in particular, like the following up and closing the loop with that survey and showing that incremental shift because change management is hard. Getting people to engage
Yeah.
is hard. And so those wins are well fought and so well deserved.
Yeah.
And so I think that's such a,
Especially the wins. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
oh no, you're good.
Especially the wins that come from people who are like very, very, I would say, against the social network. And I realized the people that were against it for the most part, um, I know that there was one person, I don't want to call him out because I think I understand what he was about. He was like, this is just too much. Like, we
Mhm.
tried this whole one tyco thing. It's not going to work. But hey, I wish you luck and you're great. Like, wow. So he's basically told me I'm going to fail. I think that was day one. He called to let me know I was going to fail. And even when we launched, he didn't get in the way, but this executive was like, it's just not going to work. This is not like our style, right? We don't need all that fancy stuff. People don't come here to do social media. Like, when people aren't doing social media, they're working, right? But then fast forward to a few months later, he called me again and he was like, can you come over and just show me a little bit around this tool? And I just want to make sure I'm like involved. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And then I went to his office and it was like this big corner office. He had all these like plaques and all these things. He was head of PR. So
Yeah.
he was like, yeah, I feel like I should have known more about this, but I don't. And I realized he was scared of it because
Yeah.
he's used to being the expert, the top dog and everything. And I was like, you know what? There's no harm in learning now. I'm like,
Yeah.
you are really smart. You have earned awards for things I can't even imagine how to
Yeah.
begin to do. So then, having that mutual respect, but I still was like, oh yeah, I told him so. So, but it was great to have that win because it was like sometimes you just keep going. You can't force everyone to come along, but it does feel good to be able to bring some of the people along who were detractors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that that visual too, of like going into that corner office being like, all right,
Yeah.
time on board. Rachel, over to you with, kind of final thoughts on measuring
I'll try
impact.
and be succinct,
Yeah.
but all value, any new value, any increase in value is driven by behavior change.
Yeah.
And communities are what normalize a behavior change. That's why they're so valuable, is because they can socialize a change and help people see that. When I help clients with their strategy, I do something called a relational persona because I don't think people self-report very well. That's just me. I'm an analyst. I've been at this for a while. People are delusional. Like, not because they're
Delulu.
not because they're ridiculous, but like we all have imaginations about who we think we are. So what I tend to do is what's the purpose? What's the goal? What's the objective? Who are the main stakeholders? And what are they doing all day? And we literally diagram out their workflows.
Yeah.
And then we try and look at them and say, what are the ones where we could make a significant impact in the quality, speed, whatever of that interaction?
Yeah.
Right? And the more important the stakeholder, the more frequent that behavior, the higher the potential that is to create value. And then again, for me, it's all about being intentional initially. And once you get that initial value, you can spread out everywhere. But if you're not focused initially, you can get just really lost unless people magically come and emerge and start using it well, right? And so if you do that, and say you have 100 people in the community and you're a 10,000 person organization, your executives are going to be like, what you can do is you can measure the value of the behavior change for that one individual or average it across the 10. And then you can project out and say, if we have 100, this will be the value. If we have 1,000, this will be the value. If we have all 10,000, this will be the value. So you're helping show them how the value scales. And again, it compounds, right? Like as you add each one of those things. And so that's my recommendation, is to like be really a business analyst about like it's different than external communities in that way. Is you've got to get really specific about what you're doing and what you're hoping to do and where it fits in somebody's life. And kind of so and last but not least, measure before you start, please, because then you can't prove anything.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can prove incrementally, but like measure before, benchmark before you start, so you know like if you're making progress.
Absolutely. And Rachel, just, for any newbies who might be listening, when you say benchmark, what do you mean by benchmark?
I just mean like if you've identified a workflow, say discussing suppliers, something we talked about earlier, go talk to 5 or 10 people who have gone through that process. And like define how long it took and how many emails, and you don't have to be super specific, but like get the main thrust of like, how did you go about this and how long did it take you? And so then you can figure out whether you're making an impact on that at all.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Phoebe, Rachel, this was an amazing episode, and thank you both so much for joining us and for giving us your time. Folks who are tuning in and listening, we'll go ahead and we'll hyperlink all of the resources that we mentioned, and also podcasts, all of those things in the show notes, so you can check those out. And thank you both for joining us on season 2 of Community Therapy.
This was fun. Thank you for having me.
So fun. Thanks, everybody.